We're happy to have with us in the studio Egyptologist Mr. Samir Abbass. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Abbass. And first of all, we would like you to elaborate on that very particular feast, because most of the people who are not from Egypt, they're not aware of the whole story behind that sweet event that ancient Egyptians used to celebrate.
So in ancient Egypt, they used to have different feasts and celebrations. The top one of them, that was the celebration of the annual flood of the Nile River. And it was called the Obit in the ancient Egyptian text, and that was marking the beginning of the year, by the way. So they considered the flood is bringing a new life to Egypt, and that was very much true back in the ancient time. When it comes to the Nile River in ancient Egypt, the Nile River was considered like a blood vein for the life of Egypt back in that time, and it was difficult that the ancient Egyptian civilization or Egypt exists as it is today and as it used to be in ancient Egypt without the Nile River. The Nile River played a great role in the ancient Egyptians, and it is enough to say that almost 100% of the ancient Egyptians lived along the bank of the Nile River. So there is 10 countries which is sharing the Nile River. There used to be 9, and now it became 10 after South Sudan, the integration of South Sudan. And among the 10 countries, only Egypt, which depends fully on the water of the Nile River for living, for irrigation, and for everything. And it's unlike the other countries which is sharing the Nile River of Egypt. And that encouraged some of the big or famous Greek historians like Herodotus to say his famous word, Egypt is a gift of the Nile. Myself, I think that he's a little bit biased against Egypt, not only from this word, from other words he said about Egypt as well. But when we analyze this word, Egypt is a gift of the Nile, it sounds as if only because of the Nile River, Egypt or ancient Egypt and the glory of ancient Egypt exists, which is not true. There is, as I mentioned, there is 10 countries sharing this Nile with Egypt, and there is only one country, which is Egypt, which has managed to get this great civilization. Depends on the Nile River. So it is not about resources, it is about the human being and the human intelligence, which is able to make the good use of these resources, and that happens in ancient Egypt. As an example of the good uses of the Nile River back in the ancient time, first of all, irrigation, and Egypt, like farm production in Egypt, make Egypt the breadbasket of the ancient world, and which means that was one of the great resources and for living in ancient Egypt, and they use the food not only to support their living, but we have lots of documentation that how the ancient Egyptians governments played a great role in supporting famines happens in the region back in that time. So another important use of the Nile River is they create the Nile River as a very sophisticated networks of roads. And there was no city.
For trade.
Exactly. There was no city. There was no town. There was no village. It was connected with the Nile River. And they used that for moving, for trading, and for moving things.
I think also we have some of the photographs you brought on screen.
So one of the photograph on the screen now is showing a god sitting in a cave. And this cave supposedly come from the island of Elephantine, which is in Aswan. That was the southern border of ancient Egypt during the Old Kingdom. And that was according to the ancient Egyptians in that time, that was the source of the Nile River. And when it comes to the source of the water or the name of the Nile River in the ancient Egyptian text, it is not the Nile, by the way. The Nile is not coming from ancient Egyptian words. It comes from a Greek word, and the Greek word, exactly, Nilus, which might come from a Semitic language. In ancient Egypt, they used to have 2 words for the Nile River, Itru, and during the flood time, it will become Habi. And the photo, we have it in the screen recently, that was for Habi, sitting in a cave, in a granite cave on the island of Elephantine, and that's in an early time they thought that is the origin of the Nile.
The relation of the tribe of Elephantine with the Hapi, because some of them are related, or actually the 3 of them are related to the River Nile, especially the female goddesses.
So I will give you an example. When you go to Philae Temple in Aswan, which is south of Elephantine, and in Philae Temple, which is dedicated to Isis, the priests there, back in that time, they declare that Isis is the origin of the flood of the Nile River. And the tears of Isis crying the death of Osiris, that makes the annual flood of the Nile River. So that was the story. Because of the importance of the flood of the Nile River, it was used in the ancient Egyptian mythology, and it was used by different priests to give importance for their own temples. Source of the Nile River, which is called Abbass River in Sudan, and that's considered the third source of the Nile River, and the smallest one of them. But it seemed that based on this, the analysis of this art, it seemed that the ancient Egyptians, they were familiar, and they discovered the source of the Nile River, and they made it as far as Khartoum to know that there is two branches, and to the north of Khartoum were Abbass branch. And we are talking about things like illustrations and art to prove these exhibitions as early as 4,000 years ago.
I think this is Habi tying the Sematawi as well. Would you tell us more about
yes,
the duality of
so
Habi?
Habi, that's like two images of Habi, and Habi was an important god in ancient Egypt, and unification between the north and the south will not happen without Habi, without the Nile River. And that's why Habi was a very symbolic art in the ancient Egypt of the unification between north and south, which will not exist without the Nile River. I will give you an example. The Nile River in Egypt has no waterfalls, has no cataracts. The cataracts start from Aswan, then to the south to Khartoum, like there's 6 of them, 6 major ones and then smaller ones as well. So that's make it so easy for people to travel along the Nile River. And if you like to travel from Upper Egypt or the south to the north, you will put your sail down and you will flow with the current. And that's because of that, because of Habi and the Nile River, that's make it easy to connect north and south of Egypt together, and that's why it became a sign of unification.
Right. Let's go back to that particular feast or that particular event that was celebrated by ancient Egyptians, and the stories about the bride of the Nile and the course of the events, the course of the story itself. In the end, they said, you earlier said before that it's not true. I mean, why was that story created? And if you like to elaborate, because the people, when they observe that particular event, they are infatuated by the story, but then it shows up that it's not true.
Okay, so first of all, it is, when I say it is not true, about throwing a living, beautiful, young girl to the Nile River. We don't have any evidence in the ancient Egyptian records to support that. We don't have any evidence in the ancient Egyptian record to support that they use a human sacrifices. There was in many other civilizations they use a human sacrifices, but one of the greatest aspects of the ancient Egyptian civilization, they give a value for human being, and they haven't sacrificed human being.
They could have thrown a dummy, for example, or a
doll. It could be a doll has been thrown in the Nile River, but if you would like to talk about how the ancient Egyptians celebrated that, we have a very good text, and we have a very good illustration. Actually, the whole festival has been illustrated in the walls of Luxor Temple. And the practicality of the subjects we are talking about today, you cannot imagine how sophisticated and how beautiful and how elaborate the festival was. It was a
sorry, but would you first explain to them how, what is the Opet and the Trinity of Amun-Ra and the festivity itself, so that people would understand what is the Opet festival?
Okay, so the Opet in ancient Egypt, that was referred to the annual flood of the Nile River. The flood of the Nile River, that was bringing water and bringing silt, which is to enrich the soil. So that's how they irrigate their field, and that's how they grow their fields. The picture on the screen now is for a well of the water in Komombo, which is wrongly known as the Nilometer. There is another image for the Nilometer, and there is a misconception about that. So the ancient Egyptians tend to measure the level of the Nile River every flood, and that's how they used to apply taxations, and that's how they used to predict, so the income, the farming income of the country every year. So going back to the Opet festival, and that's another picture of another Nilometer in Cairo, by the way. That's in Rhode Island, in the southern tip of Rhode Island, and that was still in use until very recent, shortly before building the high dam. So the practicality of using these subjects to attract attention to Egypt. So we have the entire script of how the ancient Egyptians celebrated the Opet and celebrated the Nile flood, and that is already written or illustrated on the walls of Luxor Temple as early as 3,300 years ago from Tutankhamun time. So in this festival, there was there was acrobat dancers, there was musicians, there was army soldiers and officers with their horse chariots. There was priests. There was the shrines of Amun, Mut, and Khonsu, which is a trinity you talked about. So Amun, Mut, and Khonsu, there was a family of gods. So Amun is the father, Mut is the mother, and Khonsu is the son. So they have been carried, their statues has been carried from Karnak temple along the Nile River to Luxor temple, waiting for the annual flood of the Nile River, coming from the south, and then carried back to Luxor temple as Karnak temple as well. So in this celebration, so there was even foreign ambassadors represent different countries, which is aligned with Egypt in the Middle East and Africa. They used to come and attend that. So the interesting thing that this celebration survived somehow. Abu al-Haggag is a very famous Muslim saint based in Luxor. And almost most of the families in Luxor is named after Abu al-Haggag, by the way. And his shrine, he built his mosque on the top of Luxor temple. That's when the Luxor temple was buried with the silt of the Nile River. And that makes Luxor temple a very unique temple, because in this temple, the ancient Egyptian religion has been practiced. It was turned into Roman temple as well, a church, and then a mosque built on the top. So there is an annual festival of Abu al-Haggag. His shrine, or a symbolic shrine of Abu al-Haggag, carried on a boat. And this boat carried on the shoulders of the people of Luxor in a pilgrim route, which is exactly the same route which is used by Amun and the ancient Egyptians from Luxor temple to Karnak temple and back. So you cannot imagine how much that festival attracts the interest of foreigners and tourists to come and attend that. Think about, trying to revive this festival again, the Abbass festival, the way it used to be. There is some illustrations and there are some photos I brought, which is reconstructions of the ancient Egyptian temples in colors, which is enough to convince anybody to come back if we manage to make reconstruction of this festival again, the way it looks like back in that time. And that is a practicality, and that will work even much better than having a beautiful girl jumping into the Nile River, which is a nice thing. But why not? And we have already an evidence that's of what is exactly happens, and we can bring that alive, and that's what people will like.
Thank you. Talking about festivities, seems that ancient Egyptians, they were holding so much festivities, not for the sake of enjoying themselves or entertainment, but for documenting certain values and documenting the civilization, documenting history. I mean, the connotation or the meaning behind holding festivities is way greater behind, I mean, it goes beyond the festivity itself or entertaining. If you like to elaborate on that.
So we can apply what you have just said on the Abbass festival and the Nile flood festival. So, and showing the values of the Nile River in the people life, because you need to remind the people in ancient Egypt that's how the Nile River playing a great role in their own life. That's how the ancient Egyptians believed, or it became a custom, it became a culture in their behavior to respect the Nile River. There was a penalty in ancient Egypt for polluting the Nile River, by the way. That was a serious penalty in ancient Egypt for polluting the Nile River. So there was a penalty for misusing the Nile River, because they consider that as a god. And that is the practicality of what you just said. So this festival is not only made for celebration. No, it was made in order to root the importance and the culture of the respect of the Nile River in the life, so people, they can maintain that and make a good use of that.
Also, the Nile River was important because it was used as their calendar in terms of the Sirius star and the inundation. Would you talk to us about the year, the agrarian year of the Egyptians at that time, and the beginning of it and its correlation with the river, please?
So first of all, it is because of the ancient Egyptians, we have the year 365 days now, which is wrongly understood as a Roman calendar, but it was because of the invention of the ancient Egyptian calendar, which is based on the shining rise of the Sirius star, and by counting the number of the days between that and the other shining, following year, that was 365 days, and possibly Imhotep is the one who came with this idea. So, and that was connected by the Nile River, by the way, because that was the rising of the Sirius star that was matching the flood of the Nile River. And from that moment, nearly 4,600 years ago, they start counting 365 days. 12 months plus 1 month, 5 days, that make 13 months, and every month is 30 days, which is very much like what we have today. But the difference is there were 3 seasons, not 4 seasons. And the 3 seasons, the first one that was a flood season, then the agriculture or the farming season, and then the harvest season, which reflects the main interest of society back in that time. And every season was 4 months. The Romans copied the calendar, and they changed the seasons into 4 seasons, 3 months each, which became 12 in the end, and they given Roman names like Augustus and Julius, and it was named as a Roman calendar, but the origin of the ancient Egyptians. So I'm afraid to say that there was a very small mistakes happens when the ancient Egyptians, they counted 365 days. That was a quarter day, because the number of the days between the 2 shines of the Sirius, that was 365, not 365 and quarter day. And the accumulation of quarter days, that's make a big difference over hundreds and thousands of years in the ancient Egyptian calendar. We have some book notes written by students in the ancient Egyptian schools showing that how they were confused, because in their own calendar it should be the flood season, but the water dried up, but there is not enough water in the Nile River, and that explains why we have it is the road lined with sphinxes between Karnak Temple and Luxor Temple. So the festival should be held in the same day according to the calendar, but because of the quarter day, that was shifted. And there was no water in the Nile River. It wasn't the flood time anymore, but they have to have it in the same date. So what they did, instead of having, because they need the water, they need the flood to have the boats running for the festival. Instead, there was one of the late ancient Egyptian kings. He paved a road between Karnak Temple and Luxor Temple, and lined with sphinxes on both sides, so they can have it on roads. By the way, this mistake has been corrected in Egypt, in the city of Canub, which is Abu Qir today. That's where the Nile River used to meet the Mediterranean Sea. And that was a council which is held by the ancient Egyptian priests and some of the Greek philosophers. That was around the 2nd century BC. And they suggested adding the leap year day, which is Heaven Eve as well. And that was documented on a stone, which is considered the sister stone of Rosetta Stone, hidden in a remote corner in the Egyptian Museum, which is written exactly the same like Rosetta Stone.
Mr. Samir, you're talking about amazing events, something that could attract, points of attraction, elements of attraction or reasons for any booming tourism that could happen. Why aren't we making use of it, at least currently? While we're suffering, the tourism is lacking attention. It's not working as before. Something is stumbling with our tourism process. Why can't we use that?
So
it's very easy. What you have just related
exactly
could be taken on a natural level.
Only even thinking about rebuilding an entire city according to the ancient Egyptian design. With temples, not a smaller scale, because we have the pharaonic village, which is like a smaller scale of how it looks like back in the time. No, in the same scale, in the same big scale, and could be, and we can make money out of that, not only from visits, but also from movie production. We can make a great, so why, I don't think I'm the right person to answer this question, but we need to have some out-of-the-box ideas, as it was called, and we need to have round tables, which is to bring people of different backgrounds, which is related with this industrial, like tour guides, like Egyptologists, archaeologists, and even foreign. We pay a huge amount of money for having a foreign football trainer, for training our, and it's better to invest this money for having a foreign expert who understand the market and the minds of the foreigners very well, and to come and sit on this round table, so we can put ideas, and these ideas and plans should be coded in the constitution, because whatever minister, whatever government change it should be kept running. It should be kept over 5 and 10 and 20 and over the 50, even 50 years.
Exactly.
Well, thank you very much, Egyptologist Mr. Samir Abbass, for this interview. Thank you for this insight. Thank you.
You're welcome.